This is the Wet Lunch on the High Seas podcast with historian Stephen Ujifusa. Business, history, and culture with a nautical twist. Today is the last day of Sukkot, a 7-day Jewish holiday that commemorates the end of the fall harvest and also the Israelites' time in the desert. And in 1920, the great philanthropist Jacob Schiff passed away on September 25th, 1920. And he was an immigrant who had come to this country with very little, and by the time of his death, he was arguably the wealthiest Jew in America, and he had given away so much of his fortune to the well-being of his people, specifically to help hundreds of thousands of Jews escape the clutches of the Tsarist Empire. He considered the Russian Empire to be the great Satan of the Jewish people. I'd like to read a short section of The Last Ships from Hamburg that depicts the funeral of Jacob Schiff in 1920. And this man, who was the leader of the German Jewish community, was someone who also felt tremendous duty to his poor religious compatriots from Russia, helping them acculturate themselves to America. And this is an excerpt from the chapter entitled, "He Who Saves One Life Saves the World Entire." Jacob Schiff, who had left Germany in 1865 with $500, a few references, and a packet of kosher meat, was worth about $50 million at his death. His fortune would have been much larger had he not given away many millions to charities, including the Montefiore Home for the Incurables, the Henry Street Settlement House, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, the Alliance Israelite Universelle, the Hilfsverein der Deutschen Juden, the Semitic Museum at Harvard, the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, Hebrew Union College, and many other groups that benefited his fellow Jews on two continents. Unlike his rival J.P. Morgan, he lived grandly but derived no satisfaction from collecting works of art and rare books. For Schiff, giving away money was his pleasure. On his 70th birthday alone, Schiff had written checks worth over $500,000 to his favorite charities, big and small. Most of his gifts were anonymous. No official numbers survive, but it can be safely estimated that Jacob Schiff gave between $20 million and $30 million to charity over his lifetime, or the modern-day equivalent of $500 million. The vast majority of this largesse went to Jewish aid organizations, both at home and in Europe. The funeral took place at Temple Emmanuel at 43rd Street and 5th Avenue on September 28th. 2,000 people filled the pews of the dark Moorish revival edifice, among them Mayor John F. Hyland, Lewis Marshall, and many other leading citizens, Jew and Gentile, of New York City. The service was Orthodox, the tradition that Schiff knew as a boy in Frankfurt. But there were no eulogies. In his last wishes, Jacob Schiff had forbidden them on principle. He felt his deeds spoke for themselves. "Happy is the man who, like Mr. Schiff, can forbid any praise at his funeral," said the journalist Arthur Brisbane. "He needs none." An estimated 10,000 mourners stood outside. These poor Jews wore black coats, prayer shawls, and kerchiefs as they kneeled, wept, and murmured in the Yiddish of the old country. The funeral fell on the Jewish festival of Sukkot. So these men, women, and children had walked all the way from the Lower East Side, Brownsville, and other Jewish neighborhoods to pay their respects to the man who had made America, in spite of its many failings, a welcoming place for them. If not for his strength of will and determination to stand up to bigotry, many of them would still be trapped, if not dead, in the former Russian Empire. And if not for Jacob Schiff, America would not have been das goldene Land for his people. He was autocratic and imperious and failed to reconcile his love of American democracy with his native Germany's militarism. But at his death, the American Jewish community realized Jacob Schiff was a new Moses of the Second Exodus, who would help to lead almost 2 million of his fellow Jews to the Promised Land. The pallbearers carried the plain wooden coffin out of the synagogue. As rain pelted down and the wind howled along Fifth Avenue, the thousands of mourners standing outside bowed their heads and recited the mourners' Kaddish, not in English, German, or Yiddish, but in Aramaic, the language originally spoken by the Israelites before the diaspora. It was a prayer that united Jews, Sephardic, German, and Russian, across the world. It is on Sukkot this year that my own father, Grant Ujifusa, passed away on October 21st at age 82. My father, like Jacob Schiff, believed in doing justice for his own people. He was a proud American of Japanese ancestry who felt a tremendous urge to right a tremendous wrong committed during World War II, when over 100,000 Americans of Japanese ancestry were rounded up into internment camps, forcibly and against their will. It was Dad who helped lead the effort in the 1970s and 1980s to get reparations for the survivors of these camps. When growing up in Wyoming, the Ujifusa family was very close with a Buddhist priest who was based at a temple in Denver. The priest had a favorite saying, "Where there is gratitude, there is civilization." That saying became a motto of my father's life, one that I have taken to heart. And I think that the concept of gratitude is one that extends to many American men and women who have worked tirelessly to make this country a better place. This includes men like Jacob Schiff. And on this festival of Thanksgiving of Sukkot, where we give thanks for the fall harvest, I think it is important for all of us as Americans, in spite of all our failings and divisions, to pause for a minute and think of gratitude. I'd like to close with a passage of writing by John Adams, who was one of my father's heroes. John Adams was probably the most instrumental in lobbying for American independence from Great Britain in 1775 and 1776. And he did so against great odds. And he had not the charm of Benjamin Franklin. He was sometimes chastised for his lack of tact. No one doubted his brilliance. And no one, at the end of the day, doubted that he always was trying to do the right thing. And in 1777, he wrote his wife, Abigail, a great partner in life, about his thoughts regarding the future of the American project. The American Revolution was, on paper, only about a year old. The outcome of what many consider to be a mad experiment was still far, far from certain. And on April 26, 1777, John Adams wrote his wife, Abigail, "Posterity, you will never know how much it costs the present generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make good use of it. If you do not, I shall repent in heaven that I ever took half the pains to preserve it." This is what we must be thankful for in this present generation, of the sacrifices and hard work of so many people who strove to make this country, and continue to, a better place. This is the Wet Lunch on the High Seas podcast with historian Stephen Ujifusa. Thank you for listening. You can expect new episodes every week. To subscribe to the Wet Lunch on the High Seas podcast, visit steveujifusa.substack.com.